Thank you all for coming. I'll begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend this respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are online today. In my case, I acknowledge the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. Online today are myself and Katelyn Lubcke. Katelyn is the Project Manager for Environmental Markets and at Meat and Livestock Australia. MLA are developing and trialling their environmental credentials for Australian Grassfed Beef around the country, and Katelyn is going to tell us all about that. We will do questions, so you can pop your questions in the chat, or there's only about 25 of us online. We might be able to do it by raising hands, but we'll do that all at the end of Katelyn's presentation. So yeah, let's get Katelyn to share her presentation and we'll give her the floor. So go ahead, Katelyn.
Thanks, Kate, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're dialing in from across the country. Really nice to be here and talking to you all today. I'm sounding like a bit of a broken record with this project lately, so lots of engagement and talking to everyone about it, but it's a really exciting project. So thank you all for making some time in your schedules today to sit and listen. Hopefully most of you have lunch in front of you. So this project is in its 5th year now, which is really exciting. We're starting to see some deliverables from the project. And I'll just take you through a bit of background to how we got to where we are. So this project is being led by a consortium partnership with Meat and Livestock Australia, the University of Queensland and World Wildlife Fund Australia. And it's funded through the Commonwealth Government's Smart Farming Partnerships grant program. So lots of different projects underway under that portfolio and also set to finish this year. So at the moment, we're scheduled to finish in December this year, which is really exciting, but looming closer and closer very quickly. So a bit of background about why the project exists, and this picture is sort of my favourite way to explain it now. The landscape of collecting data on farm and getting certified for that data by way of environmental stewardship is becoming really challenging for primary producers. So on the left-hand side of this big gully is collecting data on farm, measuring data on farm, benchmarking that data. And on the right-hand side of that gully is entering a certification or accreditation program and being recognised and rewarded for the data that has been collected on farm. And it's really challenging for producers, especially red meat producers, to actually understand how to get from point A to point B. And what we're trying to do is build that big suspension bridge across the gully to enable producers to get recognised for their on-farm environmental services. So the challenge is that our consumers really want evidence of sustainable production, and that is coming through in our domestic consumer sentiment survey every year. So we're getting a stronger data set that shows us that domestic consumers actually want to know more about our industry, and the better their knowledge is of the red meat industry, the more positive they feel about it. So we're in a really good position to be sharing credentials from our production systems with our consumers. But demonstration at a farm scale is quite hard for producers, and it's another thing that gets added to their list of jobs and is usually quite time consuming or costly, and involves an on-ground audit by way of someone coming out and actually verifying the data that they're collecting. So it has been quite challenging, and we really want to create a program for producers to do this that's really quite entry level and allows them to be recognised. So unfortunately, that's created a lot of confusion across the industry, and there's lots of different programs that exist, but this is one that is for grass-fed beef producers at a national scale. So the aim of the project was really to allow producers and others across the supply chain to collaborate and tell us what was meaningful if we were going to develop some environmental credentials specific to the grass-fed beef sector. So we did that through a co-design style group, and we had 5 groups that represented the 5 environmental themes that sit under the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework. And those are drought resilience, carbon balance, biodiversity stewardship, tree cover, and ground cover. So we had 5 groups, and they worked through the metrics and methods for measuring those 5 themes, what would be valuable to report on, and how it could actually be reported. So that's been a really valuable process. And some key things that we're trying to sort of make sure we're really focused on is that we want to create a platform that's voluntary for producers. We don't want to force anyone into it. So we want it to be opt-in. And we want to allow a lot of the data to be collected through remote sources, so satellite imagery and the like. And we wanted to make sure that this platform allows producers to maintain market access, but also have market access to new and emerging markets when those opportunities do arise. So to reduce some of that fragmentation down that I've already mentioned, we've tried to really clearly align with the ABSF, but also the industry's CM30 target. And so these are the 5 theme areas that I just mentioned. So tree cover, ground cover, biodiversity stewardship, carbon balance, and drought resilience. And like I said, they've all come from the ABSF's environmental pillar. So this is the key concept that we're really trying to create. We want the 5 theme areas to feed into an environmental credentials online platform, and that platform to generate credentials which can be shared along the supply chain. So they would go from the producer to the processor and then can be passed along the supply chain to a butcher or a retail level to share with consumers. We also have the opportunity to translate that data across the industry to use in other reporting. So each year, the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework is looking for ways to strengthen their data set that feeds into their indicators. And this is an example of how we can use data from this platform to do that. So we're looking to create a de-identified dashboard that allows producers to benchmark themselves within their region, but also within their state and against others in the country. So rather than encouraging producers on opposite sides of the country to compare themselves for tree cover, we want a producer to benchmark themselves with others nearby within their region. So it's more representative of that type of ecosystem. And a key part of this project that we've already launched is the digitised version of the sheep and beef greenhouse accounting framework. And that will go a long way to demonstrate our carbon balance theme. So producers completing a carbon account is really important so we understand their emissions profile on farm, and that will feed into the platform and play a big role there. So this is the sort of data that the banks and other supply chain representatives are really wanting from producers now, especially the processing sector, is what are their on-farm outputs and how can that be accounted for along the supply chain. So by giving producers a mechanism to plug that data in and generate a report and share it along the supply chain is really going to save them a lot of time. So the next sort of piece for our environmental credentials platform is that we'll be looking to pilot the platform. So we're looking to engage 500 beef producers across the country to partake in that piloting. Going quite well so far for registrations, but still looking for a few more. So I guess this is an opportunity to put a call out if you'd like to be involved in our piloting process. We're happy to have anyone from the industry jump on and participate. We want to make sure that the platform works for everyone right along the supply chain, but also make sure that we've covered all the gaps. So if that's of interest to you, please scan the QR code on the screen, and I'm sure Kate and I can share it around afterwards, but we are, looking for some more people to sign up and be involved with the piloting. So that's my last slide, Kate. I think maybe I went a little bit too fast through them, but it leaves us lots of time for questions now anyway.
It sure does, Katelyn. That's great. Maybe unshare your screen. And do people have questions? We're happy to take them through the chat channel, or you can raise your hand and then unmute yourself and show your face, and you can ask Katelyn directly. So, has anyone got a question to kick off? Here's one. What are the metrics being used or considered for biodiversity stewardship? Katelyn?
Yeah,
just
that's
an easy one to start you off.
From potentially the hardest question. Biodiversity is a really interesting one, and it's shown through the co-design that it was probably the most challenging to try and represent nationally and create some metrics that were going to account for the variation in ecosystems. Because we're really trying to encourage beef producers through this project to think about how their management practices affect their environmental stewardship, we've taken a sort of multi-pronged approach to the biodiversity piece. So one aspect of it will be measured through a statutory declaration type questionnaire where we ask producers to indicate whether they're currently undergoing specific practices that can enhance or manage biodiversity on farm. They have the opportunity to tell us if they do or don't apply to their region. And the other metrics are looking at tree cover and ground cover and forest carbon stock reports, things like that to sort of demonstrate. So biodiversity is quite a challenging one when we're not doing an on-ground assessment. So the questionnaire where we gauge whether specific management practices are being represented are really important.
Okay, thank you, Katelyn. And Julie says thank you as well, who asked the question. So that's good. It says like you've answered that for her. Anyone else quickly typing away or want to raise their hand and ask some questions? In the meantime, I've got a couple that, okay. We'll skip mine. I'll fill in some time later. But Carl is asking, what framework and metrics are you using for carbon neutrality?
Yeah, so this platform isn't specifically looking at carbon neutrality. One of the credentials in the platform is carbon balance, so the balance of emissions produced versus sequestering. So the key sort of indicator or metric for measuring that is the MLA carbon calculator, which I mentioned. So that looks at total emissions produced in that system and actually breaks it down to emissions intensity and gives us scope 1, 2, and 3, similar to SBGAF. So that's our metric for carbon. I'm not sure if I've answered that question, Carl, but feel free to come off mute and tell us if I haven't.
No worries. Thanks, Katelyn. I'm sure Carl will get back to us if we haven't. Here's one, and I hope that Jacob's not throwing you under the bus here, but how will remote sensing be utilised through this platform? He means platform, not program.
Thanks, Jacob. So the remote sensing will be accessed via an API. So we'll be pulling data in from other platforms to feed into the environmental credentials interface that can give us a measure on total tree cover, total ground cover, and the forest carbon stocks report of a specific parcel of land. We actually want to do some assessments of the median over a specific period of time to look at whether that tree cover or ground cover percentage is actively being managed or whether it's increasing or decreasing. And the reason for that is we need to account for extreme weather events in this country. So we don't want to say to a producer, or your ground cover's dramatically dropped off and not acknowledge that they've had a drought or a bushfire or a flood. So we need to look at that over a series of years and whether they're maintaining or managing it over the longer term.
Okay. I'm sure you'll find out if Jacob thinks you've answered that correctly as he wanders past in the office. In terms of, I'm going to ask a couple of quite practical questions around the piloting. One was that the dates said that they were finishing early this year, but you're obviously still piloting them. How much longer the piloting period? Oh.
Kate, do you want to just ask that question again? I think.
Yeah.
I think I heard the question, Kate. So you should be fine. So that's just me not updating the slides properly. But the piloting will take place in September, October this year. So we wanted to make sure that we had a fully finished prototype of the platform to utilize rather than just showing the people the platform. So we wanted producers to actually be able to click through the platform and engage with it rather than just looking at a video of it. So we've delayed that until September, October sort of time this year. But it will be, we've got the link to register. People just have to register that they're interested. We'll contact them with a range of dates and times, and then they tell us which one they want to sit in on. And then we'll get them to work through some example data sets beforehand, like the carbon calculator. They turn up to the webinar and then get to actually click through and use the platform. And then we go through like a feedback process where they tell us what they liked, what they didn't like, whether things were in the wrong spot, whether they hated the colours, whatever they want to tell us. And then we'll sort of incorporate all that feedback into a refinement phase. So we just want to make sure that we've pressure tested the platform with our end users before we go and launch it in December.
Okay. And do you have any regions or areas that you need better representation in?
That's a good question. We're actually just looking at that sort of data now through our registration list, which I don't have on hand to tell you. But we want to try and make sure we've got relatively even spread across the country, which is why we're going to try and do them across sort of a 6-week time period. I've just seen Vanessa's question pop in. I think it'll be about an hour, Vanessa, that people will be expected to sit on the webinar and engage in the piloting process for. So once they've registered, it's about an hour of their time to do that.
Okay, thank you. And once you've gone through your registration links, and if you're looking for particular regions, just get in touch and we'll be able to maybe promote it to the regional bodies that are in those regions, and they can get it out through their links as well. Hannah has a question about whether the environmental credentials reporting will be a compulsory requirement for producers, or is it something to improve access to markets?
It's definitely not compulsory at this point. MLA can't sort of govern something like that for the supply chain. Where we see the value in this is that there's lots of separate processes that are wanting to create a mechanism like this, and it becomes quite convoluted and confusing at a national level in what a producer in southwest Western Australia compared to a producer in central Queensland's been expected to measure and report on to their processor. So this sort of gives us a level playing field and allows different processors to sort of pick this up and ask producers for this information rather than every processor in the country having their own reporting system. It won't be compulsory to producers. Their engagement is opt-in at this point, similar to the Meat Standards Australia program where producers can opt in and be involved, and there's opportunities for premiums from that. That's sort of where I see this platform having a place, is that producers may get additional benefits from it, whether it be opportunities to supply into branded products like Coles Finest, it's a carbon neutral line and they get a premium for their beef because they've demonstrated their credentials, or whether it be supplying to a low carbon product, whatever it might be. So it's not something that will be compulsory at this point.
Yep. And Bruce Lord wants to know, does the data collected through the pilot remain the IP of landholders, and will this data be shared with processors and others?
It won't be shared. The point of the piloting is really to get feedback on the layout of the platform. So we won't be asking producers to put in their specific data into the pilot phase. But the pilot, beyond the pilot, once we've actually launched the platform, the security and privacy is a really key thing for us. Similar to the carbon calculator, we want producers to be in control of which data they share and report on. So we've created a mechanism in the platform that allows a processor to actually request the credentials of a specific producer through their PIC number, or it allows a producer to share with the processor their credentials. So we want to try and encourage that sharing within the platform where it's got those secure privacy metrics, but they can sort of download and generate their report as a PDF and share it that way. But we really want to try and maintain that privacy as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. And Julie is wondering if it's going to be based on self-assessment and remote sensing data, will there be an on-ground auditing process?
No, there won't, Julie. That's a really good question. So we don't want to clog up the space of certifications and accreditations. This is really entry level. We have such a huge cohort of producers in this country that aren't anywhere near prepared for an accreditation or certification program, and they really need to be brought up to speed on what all of these environmental factors actually mean and how to collect data on them and how they relate to beef production. So we really want to make sure that we're sort of bringing everyone along for that journey beforehand, before starting to upskill them into those other systems and platforms. So this is really entry level and allows everyone to sort of get involved. For those that have been sort of collecting this data and demonstrating it for a number of years, they can still engage with the platform and demonstrate that they've been at that position for several years now.
Okay. There aren't any more questions in the chat, so I'll take liberty. So you've done this platform for beef, grass-fed beef. Is it likely to be taken up for pastured sheep, or are they doing a separate one?
They're not doing a separate one. It's been quite an interesting process. I think probably the large majority of the 4 to 5 years we've spent so far have been understanding what's really important to producers and what's valuable to share across the supply chain. And I think a lot of that could be translatable into other commodities. So I don't think we're sort of closing ourselves off to looking at other red meat species. Mm-hmm. I think the key will be that grass-fed beef is going to be one of the hardest to measure due to the extensiveness of a lot of our systems in Australia. So if we can get it right for grass-fed beef, I think the rest will be a lot easier. So this will be a really good pressure test to see if we can make it work.
Yeah, terrific.
I'm just going to pop my email in the chat, Kate. So if anyone thinks of any burning questions later on, feel free to email me and ask those.
And I also do a follow-up email with the recording, and I'll also have the information so that we'll get the QR code so that people can register and those sorts of things. We'll make sure that goes out to not only the people that are sitting here eating lunch at the minute, but also the people that registered for it. So I think we had about 70 registrations, so it's a bit broader audience. I think we'll wrap up so that everyone can get on with their day. Thank you, Katelyn, for presenting. We really appreciate it, and there's plenty of interest, and you're getting lots of thank yous on the chat, so that's brilliant. Thank you, Trish, for your assistance in the background, and I look forward to seeing everyone in about 5 weeks for Marty's chat. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Katelyn.
Thanks, Kate.